Minutes, Mr. Kerr.
Presiding Officer, Ariane Burgess is quite wrong. We legislate for the Scotland of the present. You have to deal with the present realities, and that's something that the members who are proposing and supporting this particular bill don't seem to have a grasp of. I would love to have heard from Karen Adam what the British Pest Control Association said was a better way of controlling the rat population that is exponentially increasing in our cities, particularly in hospitals and other sensitive areas. The intervention was offered that she would say so, but she didn't tell us what those would be. I'd be delighted to hear what those are.
Karen Adam.
Thank you. The member states there that I didn't say what would be a better solution. Perhaps there are alternatives, and we know there are alternatives, but perhaps it's because we are consistently using the glue traps and not the alternatives that we can't get a better bearing on that.
Stephen Kerr.
Record will show that Karen Adams said that she had met with the British Pest Control Association outside of committee, and they had told her there were better methods, even if they were slightly more expensive. So that suggested something very specific had been shared with Karen Adams, and I think it's something that should be shared with the whole chamber. I also thought, and I really always enjoy listening to Kate Forbes, I have to say she's an excellent speaker in this chamber, whatever position she takes, but she gave a very political speech, saying very little about the areas of the bill that I'm sure in her heart of hearts she knows are absolutely not what rural Scotland wants to hear. And likewise, Jim Fairley. Jim Fairley gave another very clever speech, for Jim Fairley especially, a wonderfully clever speech, saying absolutely nothing about the things that are in this bill that he will know the people in his constituency who work the land do not want. And I'll always give way to Kate Forbes.
Kate Forbes.
Very good, because I appreciate I didn't let him intervene on me, so thank you so much. What I was trying to say in my remarks, and I'll maybe just say it again, is that I think that the licensing scheme cannot be onerous. If it is onerous and overly bureaucratic, then we may not end up with the Muirburn that we need. So there's an actual example of an area I would like to see some compromise on.
Stephen Kerr.
Welcome, but of course there are many other things in this bill, and of course I'll give way to Jim Fairley, because I mentioned him and he's entitled to have his say.
Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much to Mr Kerr for taking the intervention. I think the point of the speech that I made today was supporting the general principles of the bill, but talking about the fact that there's going to be an awful lot of negotiation gets done. There are areas of this bill that will have to be looked at, but it will be done quietly, it will be done properly, and it will be done in a way without the booyah politics that seems to be wanting to be going on in here.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, Jim Fairley is in favour of the principles of the bill, but then he says a lot of it will need to be changed. Therefore, I would suggest that if that's the case, you can't be in favour of the principles of the bill. You have to vote against the bill. But I'm sure that's not going to happen, because I've been around here for long enough to know that's not how the SNP work.
Audrey Nicholl.
For giving way. I mean, I've been listening with interest. I'm not on the committee, and I've been listening with great interest to the debate this afternoon. One thing I picked up from the report was the tension between expert knowledge of scientists and local knowledge held by practitioners in the field. So in my view, the comments that Jim Fairley made were absolutely appropriate, in that there has to be discussion and there has to be consideration given by all sides.
Stephen Kerr.
Of course there does. But if you say you're in favour of the principle of the bill, and then you say, well, there's going to have a lot of compromising and a lot of discussion, a lot of it, because a lot of this bill is not what is needed by rural Scotland. And the members opposite who represent rural constituencies know that very well. And I'm not sure I'm going to be allowed to take many more interventions.
I'm not going to be able to give you back all the time, Mr Kerr. So.
As much as I love a good and proper debate, which sometimes we occasionally have in this chamber, the fact is that this bill shows writ large the blinkered and dogmatic thinking of this green-led SNP government, because that's what it is. And what it reveals is a government that is unwilling to listen. We heard the story about how stakeholders came to my Friends Committee, Conveners Committee, Rural Affairs, gave their evidence less than 24 hours later. Without that evidence ever being considered, everything was overturned. And I'd love to, can I? I'd love to. Can I?
It's up to you, Mr Kerr. I can give you some of the time back.
Well, some of the time's fine.
Minister.
Mr Kerr would be forgiven for not realising, because he's not on the committee, that the committee asked me to make a decision on snaring when I gave evidence the week before, and I committed to give them that decision, which happened the day after, I think, the evidence was given on snaring from stakeholders. So it was the committee that asked for that.
Stephen Kerr.
I was advised that the Minister would say exactly that. The reality is that there were many other issues that the Minister was asked to come back to the committee and didn't abide by their timetable. So she could easily have said to the convener, who's one of the most reasonable people in this Parliament, by the way, that she wanted more time to consider the evidence that had been presented the day before in that committee. But this is a government.
Minister.
This is a government driven less by pragmatism, in fact not at all by pragmatism, and completely driven by ideology. And it shows itself again today as caring nothing for the views of people who live and work in rural Scotland. And the members opposite, I think, know that in their heart of hearts. This is a government that is in thrall now to this ideology, and it's dangerous. Now, Muirburn is an essential part of managing the countryside. But with the SNP Green Government's proposals, which aim to protect Scotland's peatlands, it's a perfect showcase of how prioritising optics over expertise leads to dangerous legislation. Now, the idea that somebody in Edinburgh knows better than people who have been stewards of our land for generations is actually downright offensive. Curiosity and rigorous fact-finding before making decisions used to be a prerequisite for entering public service. But this SNP Green Government is different. They actually will sit on any backbencher who dares to ask difficult questions, who dares to be curious, but instead rewards blind loyalty. If members on the government benches continue to refuse to heed the warnings and insights of those who truly understand the matters that are before this Parliament in this bill, all of Scotland will suffer the consequences. Because this bill, like many others pushed by this SNP Green Government, falls shockingly short in substance and at the same time overreaches itself. In fact, it significantly elevates the risk of wildfires, a point made by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, who have warned that restricting Muirburn locations could leave a larger fuel load unmanaged, heightening the risk of devastating wildfires that could harm peatlands. Now, I have taken a lot of interventions, and I know that the presiding officer has been very generous with me. There are many other things I'd like to have mentioned. I'd like to have mentioned licensing. I would like to have mentioned the idea that we need to extend the powers of the SSPCA, which I do not support. There are many other issues. But the bottom line of my appeal to members on this side, when we come to decision time, presiding officer, is that they vote according to what they know is right by their constituencies, and not what they have been told by a chief whip.